Hey guys, today I'm going to be making our year's supply of dill pickles, and I thought I would bring you guys along and show you how I make them. Now before I get into the actual recipe, I wanted to share a little bit about why I do canning. We have been on a simple living journey for a number of years now, and what I've kind of learned along the way is that the best way you can simplify your life is actually by doing things yourself. So a lot of us have been conditioned to just buy things at the store, right? We can buy pickles at the store. Why would we make them ourselves when somebody else will do it for us? The problem is that while it may seem like less work to just buy them at the store, there's still an energy exchange that happens when you buy things that are already made. So you have to go out to work to earn the money to purchase the pickles at the store. Where the more things that you do for yourself, you become more self-reliant, and you are no longer exchanging your time for money in order to then purchase products. Instead, you have more of a direct relationship. So you are exchanging your time directly for the product rather than going to work for the money, being away from your home and your family, paying taxes on that money, and then with what you have left, now you're purchasing a product that's already made. So a lot of the things that I do in order to simplify our life is really just about cutting out that middle step, because the more that you can do for yourself, the better off you are in the long run. So that's one of the reasons that I started making a lot of my own products. The other thing is that I am really concerned with what's in the products that we're eating and the food that I'm feeding my family. So when I make something myself from start to finish, I know exactly what's gone into that product, how it's prepared, where the ingredients were sourced from. So I'm not buying pickles that maybe came from China or somewhere overseas. I'm buying my ingredients directly from a farmer that I know, that I'm friends with. I've been to his farm. Some of the ingredients I'm growing myself here on the homestead, and it just gives you better control over the final product when you know where everything is sourced from. Another reason that I do a lot of our own canning is because it reduces waste. So when you buy products that are already made, they're already in packaging, you're bringing that packaging home and you're either throwing it away or putting it in recycling. And a lot of people think recycling is fantastic. It's, you know, what's going to save the world. But recycling is actually at the bottom of the list in terms of sustainability. It's better than throwing things in a landfill, but there's still a lot of energy intensive things that go into recycling. It's not a perfect process, and a lot of things end up in landfill anyway. So the more things that I can reuse, the better I feel about our environmental footprint. So for example, these mason jars get reused every single year. As we use these pickles up, the jars get washed and stored, and then I can use them the next year. The only thing that I have to purchase new every year is the lids, because the lids cannot be reused for safety reasons, but the rings I reuse and the jars I reuse. So from a sustainability standpoint, doing your own canning makes a lot of sense. And yes, it does save us money, but that's not the ultimate reason why I do it. I was actually at the grocery store this morning because I needed to buy pickling salt, and just for fun, I thought I would look to see how much a jar of pickles cost that's already made, and it was $5.29. Now, I haven't looked at those prices for a very long time because I haven't bought anything like that for a long time, but when I make it myself, I figure the cost is probably about half of that. So yes, in the long run, it does offer us some savings. And the other reason is preparedness. Now, preparedness is something that a lot of people don't think about, but our grandparents were very, very good at preparedness because they knew that sometimes bad things happen and they wanted to be prepared for them. So they always had a fully stocked pantry. They would can all of their fruits and veggies that they would grow themselves, and they would put them away for winter so that there was always food. You would never basically have to be without food. Things happen, we lose jobs, we have crop failures, farmers have bad years, prices go up. All of these things are reasons why it's really important to learn some of these skills so that you can start putting up some of your own food and not being so reliant on income and grocery stores in order to keep food in your house. So those are just some of the reasons why I choose to can my own food. Now, I will say that I am not a canning expert by any means. I didn't grow up with a mother who did canning. This was something that I taught myself when I started to realize all of the reasons why it was an important skill to learn. And it was also a skill that I wanted to pass on to my children because I wasn't taught how to do it, and I feel like it's a really important thing to know how to do. So I'm not a canning expert. What I would recommend, I'm going to show you this really simple pickle recipe, but before you do any kind of canning, I would recommend spending a lot of time doing some research, learning about canning safety, how to sterilize things properly. These are all things that used to be pretty common sense, but it's been lost over the years because not very many people are canning anymore. So buy yourself a good canning book that gives you all of those basics, because I'm not going to go too into depth on that. But I did spend a lot of time reading blog posts, watching YouTube videos, and just being really sure that I was comfortable with all the safety aspects before I decided to take on canning. This particular pickle recipe is actually would not meet current safety standards as far as canning goes. So with everything that I said before, once you kind of know what the rules are and you understand how it all works, it's up to you and your discretion as to whether you want to bend the rules or not. This is a recipe that I have been canning for years and my family loves it, and we have never ever gotten sick. I've never had a jar go bad. But the current canning standards say that everything has to be processed in a water bath canner, and I don't process my pickles. I just make sure everything is really, really hot and sterile, and I actually cold pack the pickles, and then I just put the hot brine over top of them. So if you're not comfortable doing it that way, I would recommend finding another video that you can watch that will give you sort of more up-to-date standards. But if you ask anybody from, you know, a couple of generations ago how they did pickles, this is how they do them. And I like to do them this way because it keeps them really crisp, and for my family to eat the pickles, they have to not be mushy. And a lot of people say that when you water bath can your pickles, you're gonna end up with mushy pickles. And I don't really see the point of canning if nobody's gonna eat it. So I just wanted to kind of throw that disclaimer out there, because if you're not comfortable bending the rules, if you would prefer a recipe that follows the guidelines a little bit more strictly, then you might be further ahead finding another recipe. But I'm still gonna show you how I do mine, and then it's up to you if you wanna try them or not. So to start with, I'm going to show you what ingredients you need, and then some of the preparation that I do before I get started. Okay, so what you're going to need is, I start with a half bushel of cucumbers. Now these are probably about 3 inches long, and I try to get them all sort of a uniform size, which is actually why I buy them at the farmer's market, because I do grow my own cucumbers, but they don't, they're not all ready at the same time. And so we tend to use the ones that we grow more for fresh eating. And then for canning, I buy them at the farmer's market because I can get them in the quantity that I need, and they're all ready at once. So that's about a half bushel of cucumbers. Now I soaked them overnight in a cooler in some ice water. So now they're all ready to go. The other thing you're going to need, so this recipe will make about 24 quart-sized jars of pickles. So you're gonna need, so this is actually, each of these boxes that you would normally buy of canning jars comes with 12. So you would need 2 boxes of canning jars if you don't already have some. And I like the wide mouth jars. So you can get the regular sort of narrow mouth canning jars, but I much prefer these wide mouth ones because it's a lot easier to pack the cucumbers in there. So I like the wide mouth. Now if you're buying brand new jars, they will come with rings and lids. These jars I'm reusing, so I also reuse the rings. When I store them over the winter, I just hang them up on some kind of string, on a nail on the wall. And you just want to check and make sure that they're not rusty. So if they have any rust on them, I tend to recycle them or just use them for regular food storage, but not for canning. And like I said, you will need to have new lids. So I get the snap lids. These ones are BPA free, as you can see. This Bernardin is a well-known Canadian brand, so I like to use those. You will need some plain white vinegar. I got these on sale, so I bought a whole bunch. I'm not gonna probably need this much vinegar, but I always like to have extra anyway. You will need some coarse pickling salt. You will need garlic. Now, the farmer that I buy from, he didn't have a great crop this year, so these heads are actually on the small side. So I bought a lot more than I normally buy. You basically want enough, these are small cloves, so you want enough to do either 4 small cloves per jar or 2 large cloves that you can cut in half. So these are all small. So for the most part, I just factored in on 1 small head of garlic per jar. So that's about 24 heads of garlic. But if you can get nice large bulbs, then you won't need as many. So you need that. Dill. So I actually grew my own dill in the garden this year, and I made sure that I grew lots so that I would have as much as I need for my pickles. So I don't know if this is going to be enough, but I didn't want to pick all of it just in case I didn't need it. So if I run out midway through, I can just run out to the garden and cut some more. But what you actually want for your pickles is not this, this fluffy stuff, okay? What I actually do after I'm done making my pickles, I take all this fluffy stuff off and I dehydrate it, and I save that just for regular dill for cooking in the winter. But for your pickles, you want these flowers. These flowers are what goes into your pickle jars, and a large flower you can actually split into about 2 or 3 pieces, so you don't necessarily need an entire flower for a jar of pickles. So I just kind of eyeball it and guess at how many I'm going to need. And what else do we need? I've used these jar lifters because when you have hot jars, you don't want to pick them up with your hands. So these are really handy for picking up the hot jars. You're going to want some clean dish towels. And over here on the stove, I have my stock pot. And this is what I'm going to make large batches of brine in. I'm going to get it really, really good and hot. And then that's what I'm going to pour over my pickles. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to sterilize my jars. So even if your jars are brand new, they've never been used before, you still want to sterilize them. So I'm actually going to do them in my dishwasher on the sanitize cycle. And then I'm just going to keep them really hot in the dishwasher until I'm ready to use them. If you don't have a dishwasher, you will want to boil these in a big canning pot on your stove and then keep them really good and hot while you're waiting to do your pickles. So I'm going to get these in the dishwasher and get them sanitizing, And then in the meantime, while they're getting sanitized, I'm gonna do some of the prep. So I'm going to start breaking apart and cutting the garlic, and I'm going to give the cucumbers another rinse, and I'm gonna kind of wash them off with my hands and make sure there's no dirt or anything left on them. And I'm going to break my florets into the sizes that I need for my jars. And then I will come back and show you the next steps. So I recommend having your dishwasher empty and ready to go. So I emptied it this morning from last night's dishes, and then any other dishes that we had from breakfast, I just hand washed them because I didn't want them in the dishwasher. So I'm just going to start loading some of the mason jars into the dishwasher, and that's a really quick, easy way to sterilize them. At our last house, we actually didn't have a dishwasher, so I had to boil them all, and it was much more time consuming and yeah, just kind of a pain in the butt. So I'm really excited that we have a dishwasher now so that I can just do it this way. I basically make enough to fill my stock pot, which is 8 cups of vinegar, 24 cups of water, and 1 1/3 cups of coarse pickling salt. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, so I have everything pretty much ready to go. So the dill florets, some of them I just ripped apart so they were a little smaller. In total, I do 2 per jar. So if I'm doing 24 jars, I need 48 of these altogether. The garlic, so some of the bigger ones I cut in half, but most of them were pretty small, so I just left them as is. And I do 4 cloves of garlic per jar, so that's 96 cloves altogether. And then the cucumbers, I'll do these in a couple of batches just because they take up a lot of space. So I basically washed and trimmed the blossom end off of the cucumbers. So the reason I do that is because there's an enzyme in the blossom end that causes your cucumbers to soften. So when you remove that blossom end, you are going to have crispier pickles, which is the goal. So I just basically washed and trimmed enough to fill this bowl, and then that'll get me through a batch of jars, and then when that's finished, I will just keep refilling this bowl with more washed and trimmed cucumbers. Here I have, move those out of the way. So the tongs here are for taking the lids out of the water, and a funnel, of course, for filling up the jars. And so here I've just brought the water almost to a boil and then turned it down to just a simmer. So that's going to keep these lids good and hot. And you can see that my brine is at a good rolling boil, and that's what you want. So that the secret to not having to process the pickles is for everything to be super, super hot, so that when it all comes together, everything seals on its own and you don't have to water bath them. So I'm going to grab some hot jars out of the dishwasher. They're all sanitized now, and I'm going to show you how I fill up my jars. Okay, so I have to work pretty fast in this part because, like I said, everything has to stay really hot. So I try to kind of keep things moving so that nothing has a chance to cool down. I will show you where I have my jars here. So I'm only doing 2 jars at a time because, again, I want to leave the rest of them in the dishwasher where they're going to stay nice and hot. So I'm going to do 2 pieces of garlic in each jar. I'm going to do 1 dill floret in each jar. So I have 1 in each. Now I'm going to stack the cucumbers in. I like to pack them pretty tightly because they tend to float once you put the brine in. So you want to keep them in there pretty tight. And I can always fit more than I think I'm going to. Now I'm going to do 2 more cloves of garlic and then 1 more floret in each jar. Okay, now I'm going to use this stainless steel funnel to pour in my brine. I should actually switch the brine over to the other burner so it's closer. I might do that after this batch. I'm just going to keep filling until I'm almost to the top. To the other one. You want to make sure that you get any air bubbles out so that you make sure that you have enough brine in there. I'm just going to grab a butter knife. And I'm just going to kind of poke it down the sides here and release any trapped air that might be in here. Okay, those are good. I'm going to use my tongs and take out one of these hot, actually sorry, I missed a step and it's a really important step. So I have a clean, dry towel here, and what I do is I just dip it in this hot water, because what I want to do is wipe these rims to make sure that there's no brine on the rim, because what will happen is the brine has salt in it and it'll prevent the lid from forming a seal. So I want to make sure that these seal, so I'm going to make sure there's no salt on that rim. And then I'm just going to place the lids on top of the jars. Together, so I'll try to get 2 apart here. Okay, now I'm going to, I already washed these rings, so you just want to tighten them until they're just finger tight. You don't want to hold the jar and twist them on, but basically turn it until you can't turn it anymore without the jar moving. Okay, those 2 are done. I'm just going to repeat that process for all of my jars, basically until I run out of brine and have to remake another batch of brine. I might have to do a couple more batches of that to get through all the jars. transfer them as I'm doing them. I transfer them to some tea towels on the kitchen table. I do them a couple layers thick because these jars are going to be really hot, so you don't want them to hurt your table. So then you want to let them sit overnight so that everything cools down, and that's when your jars are actually going to seal. So you're going to hear these little popping sounds as your jars start to seal. And what you should be looking for the next day is to make sure that they're actually sealed. So the lid of the jar is actually going to be concaved. If you see a little bump sticking up on the top of your jar, it means it didn't seal. So how I check my jars is I take off the rings and I just kind of hold on to the lid with my hand. If that's not coming off, then that's sealed. And then I just take my cloth and I wipe off the outside of the jar because the brine has salt in it, and if you spilled any while you were pouring it into your jar, it's just gonna leave a bit of a film on your jar. So I like to wipe everything down, make it all nice and clean, and when I'm sure that it's sealed, I'm just gonna transfer it back into my box that my mason jars came in. Don't throw these boxes away because they're really useful for storing your canned goods and for transporting them. Because we store all of our canning down in the basement, so it's just an easy way to take them downstairs. So you just want to do that with all of your jars. Take off the ring, check your seal, make sure that it's holding, and wipe off your jar. I recommend labeling your jars because as you start to build a bit of a stash of canned goods, you're not gonna necessarily know what's what. These are obviously pickles, but I have pickles in my cold room still from last year. So I like to date everything so that I'm using the oldest things first. So I'm gonna make new labels for these ones and mark the date on them so that I know what year these were done. And you want to store these for about 6 to 8 weeks before you eat them. They're not really going to taste like pickles right off the bat, so you might be excited to try them, but they're just going to taste like cucumbers. So let them sit for a good 6 to 8 weeks. The longer the better. And I almost lost that jar. And then they're really going to taste nice and pickly. Now I want to show you, I have a jar here that didn't seal. So when I take off the ring, I know that it didn't seal because I can still see the little bubble sticking up on top of the jar. So, and if I try to lift it off, the lid comes right off. This is not a sealed jar. Now I'm not going to bother reprocessing one jar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stick this jar in the fridge, and I'm going to let them sit in the fridge for a few weeks, and then this will be the first jar that we eat because they haven't been sealed. So that's fine to do. If you end up with a bunch of jars that didn't seal, and that does happen to me from time to time for some reason, what I actually do is I dump everything out and I reprocess those. So just because I don't want to store a bunch of jars of pickles in my fridge if I don't have to. So these are all done, and it's a pretty simple recipe to follow. We make the same recipe year after year. I tend to do that. When I find a recipe that I like and that my family will actually eat, then I just stick to the same recipe. And as far as I'm concerned, the simpler it is, the better. So this recipe basically had like 4 ingredients. And you can always jazz things up. Some people add peppercorns or different things to their recipe, but I just keep things pretty simple and straightforward. So I hope that helps to give you an idea of how to can your own crunchy dill pickles. And if you decide to make these, let me know in the comments below, because I get lots of compliments on these pickles. I give them away as gifts sometimes, and everybody seems to really love them. So I'd love to hear if you made them and how you like them. And if you enjoy the content that I create, please feel free to hit the subscribe button below and hit the little bell if you want to be notified when I have a new video. I hope you guys have an awesome day and a wonderful canning season. Bye for now.